You get an analysis, and I get a yeehaw bud. For today's JPGivin'er analysis, I'll be analyzing Ginja's perspective from a 6v6 between American gunslingers and black wolves. I think two themes for this analysis would be awareness as well as general team play, and you'll soon find out what I'm talking about. But without further ado, let's start giving her, bud. Starting things off, we got Piranha Plant Slide. I think the best way to sum this race up is that Ginja makes some plays that might not be that safe if he had a better idea of what was around him, and we're gonna go over that. And as always, when I say you, I'm most likely referring to Ginja. Alright, a couple things to go over here. You only had one red, and your opponent in first had protection, so throwing your red did nothing really. Maybe it would be good if a ghost took the guy's protection, but you don't want to use reds like that anyways in most scenarios. Besides, your next chance to red the guy out would be if you got a red at the last set, and even then, your opponent would get protection. On top of all of this, you didn't use your rear view after drafting your teammate, so even if your opponent had no protection, there was a good chance of you redding your teammate because of lag. You should have been checking your rear view more often, just to ensure that you had enough space to throw your red with next to no chance of hitting your mate. Also, speaking of the rear view, something I noticed was that you barely ever use your rear view. There were a couple instances where you began to use your rear view somewhat regularly given the situation. However, generally speaking, you should use your rear view more often. In fact, I only saw you use your rear view like once or twice for all of lap 1 this race. So I think a good starting point would be to use your rear view while on straights, since you'll be less distracted using your rear view on straights than on turns. But if you can get into the habit of checking what's behind you more regularly, it'll pay off big time in the long run. I already talked about this general point, so I'll keep this brief. You should have been more careful before throwing your red. You didn't have a clear idea of who was going to pass you or who was behind you, so there was a good chance of you redding your teammate. I think the best thing to take away from this is that you should just be a bit more careful before throwing shells. While you didn't get punished for it here, you could get punished for being somewhat careless in the future. Alright, great job on holding your shroom here. There was a chance of you pulling an item like triple shrooms from the doubles, but I think it's better to be safe than sorry, since you could have pulled a combo like triple greens and fire because you were an 8th. It's unfortunate that you got starred before the shortcut, but again, maybe that could have been prevented had you used your rear view after landing from the glider. Not much else happened for the rest of the race since you weren't able to catch up. However, I would like to bring up your approach to the block section and the turns afterwards. I think it's usually a pretty good idea to aim for the right blocks, then drift off of them. This will set yourself up quite nicely for the next few turns, which you also did incorrectly on all 3 laps. Try this method of this section out, and you could be giving her full throttle. But to sum this race up, try to focus on using your rear view more often, as well as not carelessly throwing reds that could hit your teammates by accident. Next up is Twisted Mansion. I don't think Ginja played this race poorly, and there were quite a few scenarios where he was kind of unlucky, and we'll talk about that. But we're getting started with the analysis right now. This was a risk that paid off big time. Whether it was intentional or not, getting a bad start was your ticket to having a better chance at pulling a mushroom. This is honestly quite an underrated strat, and while it can be inconsistent, you can help your team out by getting a bad start while in a spot where you most likely won't pull a shroom. After all, in most cases, the people who shroom up are the people who will maintain control of the front. So if you're starting in first or second moving forward, maybe getting a bad start would be in your best interest. The bomb itself was unfortunate because you couldn't really get around it, but the thing is, you made it pretty obvious that you were positioning yourself toward the left path, so naturally, your opponent was going to toss their bomb up on the left path. While your opponent could predict which path you take, I think if you were to snake on the straight before the split path, you would have a lesser chance of getting bombed because your opponent wouldn't have a clear idea of which path you were taking. Taking that approach would certainly be a lot better than making it obvious which path you were taking. Now, don't get me wrong, this bomb was beneficial for your team overall since it hit 2 of your opponents, but you as well. I'm not sure if this was communicated effectively or not, but in any case, I think shrooming to get even closer to your opponents wasn't even necessary. You had a solid amount of space to yourself, and you didn't have any items to take your opponents out, so why bother? Of course, this was probably just miscommunication, but you still could have prevented this by not shrooming where you did, since if anything, it put you in an even worse position whether you got bombed or not. That's pretty much all there is to talk about this race, but before moving on, it's worth mentioning how you basically ran into your teammate in the off-road at the end. Keep in mind, you were in a star, so you had no reason to stay in basically the same line as your teammate in fear of possibly getting hit somewhere. I think you should have positioned yourself more to the left side of the off-road, and both you and your teammate could thrive. Just keep that in mind moving forward, and you'll be giving her full throttle. Lastly, we have Cheap Beach. This is another race where Ginja doesn't play all that bad. Just a couple things to mention that could maybe help him out in the long run. Just a general point to bring up here, out of the 5 possible items you can cycle through on a single lap while not bagging, you only pulled 1 item. My point here is that you should try to get more items if you can. Going into the second set, you probably should have aimed for at least a single box to see what you could get, but I guess you wanted an Ultra Mini Turbo? For the record, getting an Ultra Mini Turbo here is not necessary, but I think you should have aimed for another item, and maybe had you taken a slightly wider approach at the last set, you would have a better chance at nailing an item and a lesser chance of getting redded on the final straight. Items influence the race pretty greatly, as you should know, and I think you should go more out of your way for items if you're in the pack. Now, you got a solid pull here, which is great. However, and I mentioned this on Piranha Plant Slide, there is a chance you could have pulled a really bad combo, like say a plant and triple bananas. Getting items in spots 6 through 8 in particular is generally not a good thing. Hell, sometimes even 6th and 7th place boxes lead to better results than 8th place boxes, which is kinda crazy. But in this scenario, since you were already in the back, I don't think it would be a bad idea to stop a tiny bit and get a double box in 9. You'd basically be guaranteed triple shrooms and maybe even a star as well. But my point here is, whether it would be worth it in the long run to stop for a 9th place box or not, try to adapt to this strategy if you end up in the back of the pack. Double items in 9th through 12th are way more beneficial than double items in 6th through 8th. After that though, the only 2 times you got hit were by your teammates. Considering how you got bombed on Twisted Mansion, I think your team should focus on improving your communication. The red trail was unfortunate because it seemed like your teammate screwed up, but moving forward, don't trail next to your teammates when you're slow. Just don't. And well, the back red before second set is a big red flag. I have a couple solutions to this problem. Either call out back spams like this well in advance, or curve your back spams to the point where they can't hit anyone. I don't believe this was Ginja's fault, but that's just me since I can't hear the call. Unfortunately, as a result of the miscommunication, you got last. But at least you know where your team stands when it comes to communication in situations like this, so if you guys work on it, you'll be giving her like it's your job. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. As for Ginja, I think you got what it takes to take your gameplay to the next level. Your first steps toward improvement should be working on your awareness by using your rear view more often, being a bit more patient with your shells, and prioritizing 9th place boxes over 8th place boxes where you can. So with that being said, I wish you the best of luck moving forward. But until next time, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and keep on giving her, bud.